Hi, I'm here to talk about why Iron Man 2 is still one of the worst Marvel films. I think that Iron Man 2 was considered to be the second worst film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for a long time, with Thor the Dark World uh, being the most disliked film, and I think that Iron Man 2 is worse than Thor the Dark World. And with a lot of Marvel films coming out in recent years that people don't like very much, I think a lot of people are thinking back to Iron Man 2 and having a little bit more respect for it than before. I think it's perfectly okay if people feel that way, but I certainly don't agree with that point of view. I think Iron Man 2 is still one of the worst Marvel films that there's ever been, and not just for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think that Iron Man 2 is one of the worst Marvel films in general. And I'm not talking about things like how the action looks, casting, and stuff like that. I'm not talking about production value stuff because I think all that stuff is done perfectly fine. But the film itself, when it comes to plot and characterization, I think that it's really bad and one of the worst Marvel films that I've ever seen. Iron Man is a really unlikable character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I think that is very much on display in Iron Man 2. Um, Tony Stark spends a lot of Iron Man 2 being an obnoxious jerk, making things a lot more complicated for people, including people that he cares about, being irresponsible, not taking good care of himself. Um, so he's giving his loved ones a lot to have to worry about. He is a very reckless, unappealing character in the film. And I think that after what he learned in the first Iron Man film, it could have led to Tony Stark growing into a more likable, appealing character who could still have some of his snarkiness and have a few flaws that he still needs to deal with, but he could have become a more likable hero. But in Iron Man 2, he arguably feels even more unlikable than he was in the first film, and his characterization is bad, and a lot of the humor about him being immature isn't even that funny. Um, well, what about uh, Pepper and Rhodey? Well, they aren't as unlikable as Tony Stark, but they sure are boring. There's pretty much nothing interesting for them to do. It feels like they spend the film reacting with concern and frustration over Tony's irresponsible behavior, which is understandable, but they don't have really interesting personalities. There's nothing that compelling that they get to do in the film. The villains really don't work in the film. Uh, Whiplash is a character that I feel confused by. It seemed like they were trying to make him intimidating but also make him funny. And a villain that could be both intimidating and humorous could lead to a potentially great villain, but I feel like Whiplash isn't as intimidating as I feel like he should be, and the humor with him feels more awkward than funny. Um, I guess the stuff about him caring a lot about his bird is somewhat memorable, at least, but he doesn't really have that much to really pop out as a very entertaining villain, and I feel like what's done with him as a character isn't that exciting. And Justin Hammer, I feel like another villain that they're trying to have be somewhat over the top, but a lot of the humor falls flat with him to the point where instead of being that really entertaining villain that takes up the spotlight, is so much fun to watch, I feel like he's kind of obnoxious. And with Tony Stark already being so irresponsible, it feels like, oh, another annoying character. And it feels like Black Widow's role in Iron Man 2 is not a good introduction to her character. It feels like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is already being too overcrowded with building up to other films, having characters that are there to set up stuff in future films and stuff like that. And I really don't enjoy a lot of that stuff. I really want a lot of the focus to be what's going on in the main film and having a little bit of hints at stuff that could happen in the future towards the end I think could be fun, but I think there's way too much in Iron Man 2 that's building up to the Avengers and being an introduction for Black Widow, because she didn't have her own film for a long time, so trying to give her a bunch of stuff to do in Iron Man 2, so there's somewhat of a payoff and it feels like a big deal when she gets to be with the other heroes in the Avengers, but I feel like it doesn't really work that great. So it's a film with a bunch of characters that are either annoying, unlikable, or don't serve too much of a point in the main plot. So it's a really hard film to feel interested in, and I feel like the plot is kind of a mixture of different storylines and it doesn't build up to a memorable conclusion, and I don't think that Tony Stark goes through that great of a character arc. So I think that Iron Man 2 really doesn't work. Just because the action looks good and it looks like the film had a decent budget and all that stuff doesn't make the plot or the characters good. So I feel like Iron Man 2 is still one of the worst Marvel films that there's ever been. But that's my personal opinion. If you disagree, feel free to let me know what you think.